What's up, y'all? My name is Devontae, and I sacrifice my time so you don't have to. So, a little bit of change of pace when talking about the viewership numbers this week, because I feel like this should be talked about. I don't think anyone's necessarily focusing on NXT's numbers versus Dynamite's numbers, because they're starting to gain, and they're starting to gain really, really fast. See, I don't think no one talks about the fact that, for the most part, NXT's been doing AEW's numbers, or at least AEW's numbers, nowadays. Not like it's old average or anything like that, but this week they got 703,000 views, which is astronomical for a developmental company in 2024. You know what I mean? Like, I think we need to remember in the end of the day, NXT is not a third brand. People get taken off of that brand to be brought up to Raw and SmackDown, hence the terminology brought up. And, well, looking at their viewership numbers right now in comparison to AEW, if I was personally AEW, I'd be a little bit more concerned about that. I'd be a little bit more concerned by the fact that, well, Shawn Michaels has interesting characters. Well, Shawn Michaels, he's starting to do things this way rather than doing things that way. And I think that more so speaks to the credibility of a Shawn Michaels than it does of a Tony Khan being such a terrible booker, right? Because I feel like when you take things into consideration and you want to be good faith about Tony Khan, you at least can express the notion that most wrestling fans on the internet has that proclivity to think like a Tony Khan, right? That's the problem with professional wrestling nowadays. That's why so many casual fans have left. That's why people like you tune into my channel, because we think alike when it comes to professional wrestling and the shape of professional wrestling. We see certain things that we feel like if you were to boost it up a little tiny bit, it most likely would explode the wrestling business, right? But instead, rather than taking 10 steps forward, you rather take 5 steps forward and then take 10 steps back, right? And I think that's more of an indictment on Tony Khan. And quite frankly, you can look at a guy like Triple H and say the exact same thing also. But Triple H, lucky for him, he has a bunch of security blankets built underneath him, so he doesn't feel the brunt of, his collapsing failure as a booker or as a creative director, quite like how Tony Khan would feel it, right? Not to mention, objectively, I'm just looking at both guys and see how they book. You see people that are being created, you see moves that are being made currently at the moment. Outright, Triple H is a better booker than Tony Khan. You can sit here and try to, feign cope if you want to. The proof is in the pudding. You know what I mean? It's not just coming from the, perspective of the average wrestling fan, but, you tell me. I guess the indictment on someone like a Vince McMahon was he was ripping up scripts and, he's changing everything, and, the morale in the locker room is down because, well, this guy, he keeps making a bunch of flippant fucking decisions without taking anything else into consideration. Well, judging by what we've been hearing these past couple of days, it seems like Tony Khan is doing the exact same thing, right? With an over-bloated roster, right? With everything that's coming down on him in regards to the viewership numbers tanking no different than how it tanked when Vince McMahon was in creator. So I'm just saying that we being a little bit here consistent, that's the thing, right? We're going to be a little bit consistent, right? That's why I look at this and I say to myself, is it really a Tony Khan problem, or is it just that Shawn Michaels is making the correct moves? I seen someone on Twitter when I was actually finding out these numbers, and they said something along the lines of, why aren't people up in arms about NXT and they're not being irrationally, moody and, emotional and because these people, they project so fucking hard and they say things like, why are these people being irrational or emotional about the numbers or this information in regards to this? One, as if you haven't actually engaged in the same manner when you were younger, or hell, maybe even last week, but here you are pretending as if you aren't the same way as far as how you think you're on the fucking internet, buddy pal, junior pal. Everything happens like this, okay? That's the reason why most people go on the internet, so they can express their feelings and they can talk how they want to talk, because they know damn well in real life they wouldn't be able to do that, right? That goes for me also, by the way. But my point being is, though, when you say things like that, what are you quantifying? Like, that's what I like to see whenever I hear people talk about measurements, when they talk about numbers. You're just saying the numbers, you're just saying the measurements, you're just mentioning the metrics, but like, what are we legitimately quantifying as far as the comparison is considered, right? You say things, for an example, like, why aren't we up in arms about 703,000 viewers when we were doing the exact same thing to AEW? And I would just like to say that, let's see, NXT, carry the 1, carry the 2, buckle my shoe. I think their average viewership number, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, it lingers around the 500 to 600,000 range, right? And they're a developmental brand, right? one can argue out of all the brands of professional wrestling, let's just say the top 5 brands in professional wrestling, they're probably like number 4, arguably number 5 behind New Japan Pro Wrestling, if you want to be, truthful about the whole scenario, right? One could probably say number 4 though, but like I said, they're vying for the number 4 spot. Number 3 is Dynamite, number 2 is probably Raw, and number 1 is probably SmackDown at the moment, right? So they're vying for that number 4 spot. And to see them actually reach a number like that without any legitimate stars on their brand, and by the way, I'm not even going to sit here and pretend as if Sexy Red is the reason why the numbers came in like that, because if you go look at the YouTube viewership numbers, you see where her numbers are as far as the segments are considered. No one gave a shit about Sexy Red like that. If anything, guys like Jordan Grace, I mean, I'm not calling her a guy, but I'm saying people like Jordan Grace, people like Ethan Page, they're the ones who probably brought in the overrun numbers that pushed them over the edge, right? And it's not to say that people didn't come watch Sexy Red when she first came onto the programming, right? But it's to suggest that she herself wasn't the main marker as to why the show succeeded. For an example, like what you would see with Sasha Banks when she first showed up, right? And she had like that early 900,000 number that kind of made a difference in the overall viewership number, right? Right? We want to give all that credit to Sasha Banks. Well, if we're looking at the numbers, it seems like Sexy Red didn't do quite as good versus, at least on the social media numbers. I can't speak to the television numbers, but on the social media numbers, it seems like people like Jordan Grace and Ethan Page got more clout than she did, right? Which is understandable, because here's the thing. All wrestling fans, for the most part, I'm not saying, well, maybe I shouldn't say all. Maybe that's not really a good way to quantify it either, to be honest with you, or at least qualify it, because you look at wrestling fans, music is diverse. But I will argue that most wrestling fans don't give a shit about Sexy Red, right? I think most wrestling fans, for the most part, care about rock music. And if they do care about rap music, I think the rap music that they care about, just because of the kind of, it's kind of hard, again, it's kind of hard to say, but I just like to look at wrestling fans, unless you're a little bit younger, especially on the internet. I think most wrestling fans who listen to music, depending on each genre, it doesn't really matter. I think there's just certain type of, just how they carry themselves in professional wrestling as far as how they think on the internet. I think there's a bit of wanting to see the actual talent, because I think most wrestling fans would like to agree that talent is a bunch of things in regards to how you engage in professional wrestling. I don't think people care about Sexy Red that much. I think people who actually watch NXT, for an example, in particular NXT, the people who are that intricate fan base, I think when they look at music, they look at music no different than how they actually look at the professional wrestling as far as having to engage with the talent. I think they care more about the specifics within the talent. So if you listen to rock music or you listen to rap music, I don't think you're listening to, say, a Sexy Red as much as you're listening to, say, for an example, a Kendrick Lamar, right? That's just at least how I think. I could be wrong about this. I could be completely off about this. I'm just looking at how they, engage with the professional wrestling and then using that as a comparable metric in order to see how they actually would look at anything else as far as another entity is concerned, right? But my point being is, though, you look at the numbers in comparison to NXT and AEW, and the first thing you have to actually say to yourself is that NXT is a developmental brand, and it's fucking incredible to see the number that they did in comparison to AEW. Dynamite being the flagship programming for their brand. You would think with the flagship programming, right, the third place in all of professional wrestling in regards to brand notoriety, they should be at the bare minimum around the 900,000 mark, right? That's where they were on a consistent basis for a while, not even 2 years ago. And now they've fallen to 800,000, and now 700,000, and even in some occasions 600,000. They are now about to compete with NXT all over again, not because there's an actual market out there to want to see two professional wrestling brands on Wednesday and Tuesday night go at it, right? Or if they were to compete on the same night, it's not because there's a market of indie wrestling fans that make up that bubble. Because again, you take both of those combined fan bases, and they probably make up maybe 1.5 million fans, right? All together, Raw would destroy both AEW and NXT with both of their audiences combined, for an example, and that's the second biggest brand in all of professional wrestling currently right now. Let's not even bring SmackDown into the equation. My point being is, though, when AEW gets a number around 700,000, it's not really impressive. You know what I mean? Like, take for an example, right? I'm not going to throw out any names in particular, but for an example, I got 3,000 subs. If I were to get something around, say, I don't know, 400,000 views, right? With me being the channel that's 3,000 subs, that's insane. That's fucking incredibly impressive, right? Versus a channel that has around, say, for an example, 1 million subs, and they get the exact same number that I got. it's not as impressive. If anything, it looks pretty fucking lame because your audience essentially is telling you only 40% actually engage with your content. And that's not even taking into the account that, you know, people who came outside of your channel, you know, the ones who got the recommendations, they were probably looking at your content, because I'm pretty sure, considering both of our channels, you know, one is bigger, one is smaller, you got more recommendations than me, right? So really what is being said is that 40% of your audience, and maybe some people skipped around, see the recommendations, and they watched your video, that was equatable to my one video when I have 100,000 beyond, like the fucking 397,000, you know, smaller fans in comparison. It's just not as impressive in comparison, right? So I think that's a bad faith engagement, because it's like you're feigning ignorance and you know exactly what you're talking about and what you're trying to insinuate, and you know what you're trying to do as far as painting a broad picture about NXT and, you know, oh, WWE fans are this certain kind of way, they're hypocrites. That's what you're trying to say, when in reality, no, you're just bad faith as far as what you're trying to engage. And again, I'm not going to call the guy's name out or anything like that. I just thought when I seen that comment, that's really manipulative. That's really manipulative. But these will be the first people to call out tribalism. You'll be the first ones to call out tribalism, but you yourself can't even give an objective take on the opposing wrestling company in regards to what you favor more. I think that's just so diluted and so manipulative and so disingenuous. But kind of bringing things back to what AEW are doing for these past couple of weeks to put them into a position where now they're kind of default competing with NXT again, not because it was like something promoted or something along the lines of that, but because your numbers have now fallen to the point where now you have you're defaulting a war with NXT without you wanting to do it. And again, that's a bad thing. People are like, oh, and I know people are going to probably focus on the fact that, well, Devontae, they were 680 something a couple of weeks. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I think it was, what, 672,000? Someone correct me if I'm wrong. That was the number 2 weeks ago, right? 672,000, something on the lines of that, right? Or at Devontae, there was 713,000 last week. I think that was the number, right? Again, correct me if I'm wrong. And it's like, well, Devontae, they grew tremendously. First off, I don't know what fucking world you live in when 77,000 or whatever the number would be. What would be like 13,000? What, 13 minus what, 88? That's like what, 75,000? I don't know what world you live in where 70,000 plus fans, and that somehow means that that's such an intricate build-up. You can't even get out of the 100,000 bracket that you were in the previous week. So no, I don't find that to be impressive at all. Impressive to me would be you at the bare minimum getting back to 900,000. Although one can argue you just got back to the spot that you were averaging a couple of years ago. Again, nothing about AEW is impressive unless they get over 1 million, and well over 1 million, maybe around 1.1 million, a number that they don't normally get. That's impressive. Going outside of your boundaries is impressive. Getting a spike to a number that you are already considered below in regards to the metrics in comparison to previous years, that would be considered low. That would be considered, if I was looking at my YouTube metrics and I went to my YouTube studio, you know, it would be a gray area, a gray arrow pointing down still. That would be it. That would be telling me you are getting less people are viewing your channel. Even though it went up, your average median is not 700,000. That's not what it was a couple of years ago. That is what it is now. That's the sad part. You dropped tremendously. That's the part that we focus on. That's the part that we care about. But again, how do we get to this point right here? Let's engage with the content now, right? Because we do this every week. We have a little bit of a reflection off of what's been going on these past couple of weeks that got them to, you know, get this number. So last week, what happened last week in regards to the content, right? It was a pull-apart brawl. You got Darby Allin coming out. They were promoting the show for AEW Double or Nothing, right? Now, granted, we're going to take that into context as far as engaging with the product, because that's going to be the show that most people seen that made them want to come back to the show the following week. Some, not all, maybe even a small percentage, because I would say most people probably came to watch AEW to see the fallout of Double or Nothing. But what does that say about your programming outright, at least in my opinion, when you can't even get 100,000 boosts? You can't get back to your regular median number that was considered low 2 weeks ago or 2 years ago, and 800,000. You can't even make it back to that medium from the fallout out of one of your biggest pay-per-views of the entire year. That's the fallout. The fallout number is 70,000. That's what you use in order to fucking consider success out of your go-home show and your pay-per-view. One can argue Double or Nothing is probably like what their second biggest pay-per-view of the year behind All Out. Or I guess at this point now, All In. I think All Out was considered their WrestleMania for a while, right? Now I think it's All In. Double or Nothing is considered probably their second biggest pay-per-view of the year. Then following that is probably Revolution, and then Full Gear is probably number 4. That's their big 4 right there, right? And Double or Nothing, that's like your SummerSlam for the most part. That's like your SummerSlam of the year. And you barely were able to pull in, you didn't. You didn't pull in 100,000 fans. That was the content that people were using as a reason to watch your show. And then they come into the show, and what did you do this week? Not a goddamn thing. As a matter of fact, I would even say this. I would say this. How much you want to bet most people tuned in? Not all, but I would say a good chunk, at least the people relative to your own audience tuned in because they wanted to see people who returned last week, like MJF for an example. Maybe they wanted to see an explanation as to what was going to happen with Edge, right? We didn't get Edge as far as explaining himself, right? We got some lame ass, stupid ass announcement for a fucking tournament. MJF didn't come out, right? None of the things that people wanted to necessarily see, in my opinion, you were able to actually give to them. It wasn't even necessarily what I would call a traditional fallout, because it wasn't. It was just chugging along to the next storylines without giving any kind of, periods on the end of any of these sentences. There were so many people who were missing from the show who were there last Sunday, and your excuse is probably going to be to watch Collision. That's not it, bro. That's not it. This is why I keep trying to tell everybody. Quality over quantity. I heard that Tony Khan wants to do another program, and he's very much considering, I don't know if it's to appease the people in Turner Broadcasting or because he truly wants to actually do it, but regardless, he's very much considering adding on a third hour to fucking Dynamite, which is atrocious. That is atrocious thinking. You know what? Let me not say that, actually. I did hear a third hour. I don't necessarily remember hearing whether or not it was Dynamite. More or less, I'll say this to not get myself into trouble. He wants to have more content, right? He wants more hour of programming for whether it's a new show or adding on time to an existing show. My point being is he wants more AEW on top of the AEW that we currently get at the moment. People keep saying things like, Devontae, they've only been around for 5 years, right? You ever think to yourself that maybe they've been making a shit ton of terrible decisions these past 5 years, and that's why they aren't growing? It's never give them more. Devontae, we need to give them more of a chance. It's never actually looking at the chances that they do get that they completely fold and fail on. Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think about the fact that 5 years of failure can be the reason as to why they fucking suck at the moment, and not just simply they haven't had enough time? No, they have done things in those 5 years, yes or no? Have they succeeded? Yes or no? I'll give you the answer, no. How do I know this? Because they are now, right now, their median is almost half of their peak when they first started to begin with. That's my reasoning. You're not giving me any reasons. You just obfuscate from the situation in order to provide some type of fucking defense for your favorite stand company. And like I said, I'll say it once and I'll say it again. You're doing more damage to your company than anybody out there who has a criticism going out there and saying that they don't like the company, right? Right? You constantly having to hold their hand to get across the street at the age of 4. What the fuck you think is going to happen when they turn 20? And you keep holding their hands non-stop. What's going to happen when you're not there to hold their hands? But like I said, man, look, was it an improvement in the ratings? I guess by default, sure. But in comparison to another developmental company catching up on you, is that really the kind of flex that you want to go around and say that you're currently owning at the moment? Hey, WWE fans, we grew 70-something thousand fans this week compared to last week. Is that really the flex that you really want to do right now? That's what you want to strut. That's the kind of peacock feathers that you want to strut in order to get a mate. Because I can tell you right now, that right there ain't flaunting. What you're telling me is that you're stagnant and that there's another race car that's catching up on your ass really fast. And that's the race car that was falling behind you a couple of fucking laps. Who's like right on your ass right now. And all you can tell me is 5 years. 5 years. 5 years. Okay. Keep it up with that mentality. And when that inevitable time comes when NXT actually beats them in the ratings, beats them in the viewership number, then what? Huh? Then what? What's your 5-year excuse then, huh? What's your 5-year excuse when you have some legends in your best? When you got people like Edge, people like Bryan Danielson, people like Chris Jericho, who can't even compete with Trick Williams? What's your excuse then? Stop holding Tony Khan's hand. Stop holding AEW's hand. And what you need to start doing is smacking their damn hand. Telling them what they're doing wrong at the moment. Letting them know that you can't keep trudging along with this kind of mentality of believing that your shit don't stink. Letting them know that you constantly having to whistle past the graveyard, eventually your ass gonna be in the graveyard. Eventually your ass is gonna have a plot. Right next to WCW on the left and right next to ECW on the right. Use your minds, don't use your heart. Empathy is for the weak. Empathy is for the weak. And more importantly, stop standing for wrestling companies. Wrestling today isn't a complete shit stutter fucking all the fucking it's horrible. Wrestling is fucking terrible. Whether you're AEW or whether you're WWE. Just because WWE's doing better doesn't mean they're currently good at the moment. But I can tell you right now, AEW is 100 times worse. You don't like that truth? Then let me refer to you the numbers. Because those are facts. As always, my name is Devontae, and I'll be catching you guys later. Deuces, P-Eyes.